It is so exciting to be up here because all these lovely people have just set up the mood. It is just so beautiful. You just ride in on the wave, and it doesn't matter. The thing about Harmony Spiritual Center as a teaching center, that also gives me a boost. Because if I had to come up here as a minister or a preacher, I would be so inadequate. I would feel I was a fraud. I couldn't give the message, like, who am I? But I can come up here as a teacher and talk to my friends and discuss things that I know. So it's easy. I'm just among friends. And I'm so glad that we're not a big fancy church, so I don't have to feel uncomfortable. But that's just me being selfish. You know, one of the things that Glenn and I talk about frequently when we are up here is what we personally call the mechanics of the universe. Because there are laws, you know, like gravity, all right? You're going to pay attention to gravity. If you're going to, you know there's a law of gravity, you walk out on a cliff and you look down, well, you know what will happen. And so you ask yourself, am I going to jump or walk away? And then you say, oh, hell no. And off you go. Well, that's what we do with the spiritual laws. They're just as real and as invisible as gravity. But they're there. But that's what we want to teach here at Harmony, the mechanics of the universe, or the manipulation of energy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like you manipulate a person to do your will. Manipulating the energy is like a sculptor manipulating clay to make a beautiful product. So that's what I mean. I don't mean something nefarious when I say manipulate the energy. But that's what we become accustomed to doing, is to know the laws of energy and how to interact with that. You know, the first time I ever heard of being a co-creator with God, this was 60 years ago. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there was nothing spiritual to seek after. There was a Unity Church, and we had the big deal going around then was the Edgar Cayce study groups. And you would go for a meeting once a week, and you would study this book, A Search for God. And that was my first metaphysical awareness, other than all the woo-woo stuff that I'd been reading. That was the first serious thing, and they talked about being a co-creator with God. So you worked with the energy and what you had. So once you realize and understand that you are an equal partner there with God, then you know to where the path goes from there. I have to think of that old story about the gardener, and he had this beautiful acre of just gorgeous gardens. So the minister came over to visit because he wanted to see these beautiful gardens, and he stood there and he said, oh, what God hath wrought. And the gardener says, yeah, you should have seen it when he had it by himself. So you see, we're an integral part of that creativity. We've got the hands and feet, and we put into expression the inspiration that we receive from divine source. But the important part about that, understanding that connection, is to have knowledge of what it is. To understand that that's the divine speaking to you, rather than it just be, oh, you know, okay, you know, and you think it comes from you somehow. Now I'm going to read something. I know what it says because I wrote it, but it looks so good on paper, I'm going to read it. And this was from my blog. And it says, you will never be more of the God aspect of yourself than when you're creating. When you are creating, You stand aside and let the energy flow to you and through you into the creation. You, by nature, as the creator, you just stand aside and surrender to the muse of inspiration. Now here's the kicker. It's not essential that you make a masterpiece, and it doesn't matter if it's just crap. What is important is learning to receive the inspiration. It's the journey, not the result. Because nobody cares, they just enjoy your product, whatever it is. If you're a first grader and you make a clay horse, you bet you there's some mama and daddy going to be proud of that horse, even if it looks like a duck. It's the act of oneness with all that is divine that's important as we create. It is then you finally become of use. You are usable in the spiritual universe. That's why you came here, to learn to be usable and extend the inspiration of God. Not because of the creation, but because of going through the process of creation. Now, I know that you've heard PJ talk about our mutual friend that we had when we were in Waco. We've known this lady together when we were all attending a New Thought church in Waco. And from the beginning to this day, this lady laments the fact that she doesn't have the connection to God that we do. That's impossible. It is impossible because everybody's got the same connection. This lady is the most creative lady in all the world, and I've been in her kitchen cooking with her. She's also a great organizer. She does things with her hands. She's just a remarkable human being, and she's receiving that connection, but she doesn't recognize it. That's our job here, is to learn to recognize that that's coming through you. I can just visualize her standing, making a pot of soup and standing back and thinking to herself, this needs something. What does it need? Does it need a bay leaf? Does it need some tarragon? Fennel. It needs fennel. That's the divine speaking to her, and she doesn't recognize there's a source. And it's the most mundane thing in all the world, is cooking a pot of soup. But you're connecting with God and the divine and the creative force on every single level of every day. And it doesn't become enhanced until you recognize it. It grows. I think about Glenn when he used to build seawalls. Before the job started, he would go out there and he would just sit on the dirt and think and be quiet and let the dirt tell him how to build that particular wall. Because when you're building on the water, everything is different from one to the other. It's the quality of the soil, it's the current of the river or the lake and how it hits. But he just sits there, and then it comes to him how he should build that particular item. So here we are, all of us, co-creators with God every day. I think about being familiar. Reverend PJ calls God, I forgot, George. Okay, we were studying in the book study this morning, and some other minister was calling it Coati, C-O-A-T-I, creator of all that is. And it's the important thing to become intimate. It's when you can call on God for even the smallest things, like what shall I put in my soup to make it perfect, as it is to call for big things. It's the interaction and the habitual comfortableness of having that connection. with God. So, we were talking this morning about how in the Hebrew faith the word for God is so holy you don't utter it. And then if it's written in books, when it's supposed to have a word for God, there's just a space because it's too holy to speak or even write. Well, holy smoly, what good is it? What good is it unless you can become so familiar that you can ask it for the small things, like what shall I put in my soup? The energy of all that is runs through us, each of us, and it responds with more and more vigor when we use it and we recognize it. It becomes magnified in us until we are so living with that, It's like when you have a new baby, you don't know what to do and you're so careful, and pretty soon they're teenagers and you're so comfortable with them, they're just there, you live with it. When you're newly married, you just have this relationship and they're them and you're you, and then when you're old as Glenn and I, you're just one person. Well, that's the way it has to be with the creative spirit. We have to be so comfortable with it that wherever we are, it's so imbued in us, it just ekes out of our pores. It's like when a person comes in this church, and because we all believe in healing and we all accept that that's a fact, a stranger can walk in here and walk out feeling better, not knowing that they have been, by our presence, that they've been healed. It's that vital to the existence of the planet, to learn that we are co-creators in everything that we do. One of the interesting things that I've learned about creative people, that when you are a creative, you're usually a creative in multiple things. You're gifted and, may not seem fair, but the true gift is not in the painting or in the dish you prepare or whatever. It's knowing how to contact the universe and being that at oneness, that co-creation process, that you just become that. So that is the gift, not the expression. I know this is what Emerson says about it. It matters not what your gift is. God enters by a private door into each individual. Well, I know where that door is. This is when you meditate, we teach about the chakras. And then there's a pineal gland in our head. The chakras usually relate to a physical organ. Okay, the pineal gland is at a crosshair between here and here. So where that intersects, that's where the pineal gland lives. So when you're in meditation and sending that energy through that, and I bet you, for each one of you, when you receive an inspiring thought, that it just comes into your head. That we just say, oh, it just came into my head. It literally comes into your head, and when you meditate, that sending the energy throughout your body, you're enhancing not only this chakra or gland or whatever, you're healing all of it. So there is an actual physical location. Just thought I'd throw that in there. So God is expressing through each of us who we are as we are. And thank goodness, wouldn't it be awful if we were all like robots and the same? Thank God for the tapestry of humanity. This now I'm going to read is from Glenda Walker. Some of you may have been around long enough to remember her. She and her husband used to come to our church over on Pennsylvania and they performed for us. They played the guitar and they sang. And she's just a wonderfully unique person and a very creative person. So this was in one of her Facebook posts, and I thought it was so spot on. And she said, "I think everything you do in life is art. What you do, how you dress, how you love someone, how you talk, your smile, your personality, what you believe in and all your dreams, how you decorate your home, your grocery list. Life is art." So we're all creative in some way or form. I think about this story about Rebecca Lau, our Rebecca. She told about way back in the day, she was taking the dog for a walk, and she saw some kind of trash on the side of on the ground by the sidewalk. And she was looking at it, and in her mind, she had this creative impulse of what it could be. And so she went home and she told her wife that, and some of you may not know Rebecca, but her first wife died. Her name was Jean. So she went home and she told Jean about this, and she said, "I'm going to take a welding class." The rest is history. So we're all receiving this information. But this is my understanding from what I've read about what is happening to us now. That life out there is just speeding up. And what is happening, that our probable selves are merging. And some of the things that we did for play as children that we discarded, we may not even remember, that's still lying dormant within our creative mind. And so with it speeded up like this and you're merging, it may be that an old gift that or creative expression is falling off. And a new one is coming to the forefront. Old people that you used to be with, they just fall away. It's just a natural occurrence. And new people are coming in that prompt this dormant memory to come into existence. So your creativity doesn't stop being a singular or whatever expression you're expressing now. It's a growing thing that we're all evolving. So what keeps you from fully expressing in your life? I think it's the same thing with all of us. We may want to try something new, but fear stops us. I think about Scott just suddenly, out of the blue, becoming a painter. Where did that come from? It was dormant in there all the time. I bet when you were a kid, you colored outside the box. It's there, it's expressing, but sometimes the circumstances change, or now is the time for you to do that thing. And if you're thinking it, don't be afraid, because there is a way it will happen. That's what becoming familiar with the God impulse does for us. That we are so familiar that we can relax all of our barriers and just live in the flow. And your energy becomes brighter and more enhanced, and you walk through the grocery store, you find strange people smiling at you. They're not smiling at your beautiful face, they're smiling at your energy, that your energy is touching them. It's a beautiful thing. So the key to life is to become the master of this energy, to become accustomed to this energy. So whether we want to be an artist or a writer or have success on the job, this energy it helps you express it. Now, PJ always talks about action steps. Well, I've come up with some action steps. The first one is acknowledgement. Acknowledge that this is the God energy that is speaking to you. And maybe our friend someday will come to the realization that she's always had God in contact with her. The next thing is to validate. You know, with your children or your spouse, validation builds a closer relationship. I see what you're doing, and I appreciate your kindness. Or I appreciate this coming from you. You validate that relationship. Well, your relationship with the divine is enhanced by that validation. And the third one, once you've got these other two conquered, is to surrender. Just surrender and let that creative force do what it does. You no longer have to call on it. It's with you every moment, and manifest that hidden desire. And trusting, when you surrender, you trust. You trust the divine guidance to always be with you and reveal the next step. And then there's something that enhances all of that. But I think most of us here, all of us here, it's like when you add a gas additive to your engine in the car. Well, this is like adding that gas enhancing element to you. And it's do everything you do with love. Love what you're doing. Love the person who you're doing it for. I promise you, you don't want to cook a meal for your loved ones when you're pissed off. The food is much more palatable. Trust me, I've learned the hard way. So anyway, the basic thing is take charge, acknowledge and follow the evidence that you've been given, validate with gratitude, surrender and open yourself to a new vision, because there is one. You're never stagnant. I'm 85 years old, and I'm looking forward to my future and new ways of expressing. It doesn't stop unless you do. Remember what I wrote. You will never be more of the God aspect of yourself than when you're creating. Thank you.